could you help us understand what's the difference between quantitative and qualitative data? So the Netflix watching data set, right? Well, that is quantitative, right?
Yeah. So I think people always feel that like quantitative data and qualitative data are like diametrically opposite, but actually not really. So I think quantitative data is the one that we associate most often with the word data in general. So, things that have numbers, things that have categories. So like, yeah, the Netflix one, for example, like when you watch certain shows, so there's like a date, time element to that data. You also know how long certain shows are, so there's a numerical value. And then to some degree, you can categorize them based on genre, based on themes, for example. But then people would presume qualitative data is like, the conversations that people have within these shows, for example. Or in Singapore, we always talk about qualitative data in the context of interviews, like this interview right now, right? So this is considered qualitative data. Or for example, I guess like very traditional research, like reading papers, distilling them into other research papers, etc. Really, anything qualitative can also be turned into some degree of quantitative data. And that is where I guess data storytelling and especially data visualization is very helpful. So I mean, we practice a lot of this also in like other businesses, but we don't realize we're actually turning qualitative data into quantitative data. So for example, when we do things like SWOT analysis, right? Like when we sort of make a metrics to immediately understand what something is high effort, low effort, high impact, low impact. Like we don't know the exact value, but we really sort of intuitively know why something is harder than the other, right? And this is like in the qualitative realm, but you can turn into quantitative once you put it on a chart, right? And there's also things like, as I mentioned earlier, like there's this whole field or practice called, natural language processing.
Okay.
Where you can combine words, right? So you give, say like, certain words the value of 1, and then you give another group of words the value of 2.
Okay.
And then you also can understand the frequency in which certain words appear together. And you can then start to map out an analysis of how often, for example, if you want to go and like analyze like, scripts of like our ministers, right? How many of these like buzzwords get mentioned?
Like innovation.
Yeah, like future ready,
So if I count how many times they use future ready in every budget speech, for example.
Then like if you, for example, if you compare year on year and you quantify all of these ministerial speeches, you begin to have a clearer picture of like the whole of government approach, right? Like where are they going? Because we will know that, these certain phrases or words get repeated very often. And it's in the operational mindset of like our ministers, which is why they show up here and there. So I think these are things that help us understand things too. And you may think it's qualitative and people will, cite some of these examples anecdotally, but, you can put them into a processing or computational method and gain a much greater clarity around exactly like what's being discussed now.
So people talk about how data is used to create insight, but data itself is not the insight.
Yeah.
So for you, what is the difference between data and insight?
Well, so data is just information, right? It's like, for lack of a better word, it's like a dead thing. Like it's just, if you open an Excel file, it's just a list of values. But insight is what you gain from it. Right. And everyone, depending on what your question is, what your intention and purpose is, you will gain a different insight from the data. So if you have, for example, Singapore doesn't make public very large data sets like about many things, but one of the things we do have is housing prices.
Right.
So we have the price value of every single unit sold in the resale market over the last like 20 to 30 years, right? And anyone can use this to gain different types of insight. So if you're a property agent, you're going to use this data to understand, for example, what the latest prices for certain types of units in certain geographies or, certain regions in Singapore. If you are a policymaker, you will want to analyze this to understand how maybe certain cooling measures that you're applying on the market has influenced housing price. But for Kontinentalist, instead what we looked at it, when we look at it, we questioned ourselves about the affordability of HDB flats. And not in the same way that how like, I guess I'm presuming that policymakers at HDB, when they look at housing prices, they want to make sure that the average price of like a 3-room or 4-room or 5-room flat is still very affordable to the average Singaporean as well. Like, so they will match it to, median wages and that counts maybe from a certain percentile onwards, etc., etc. But I think for Continentalist, when we recently published a story about this, and for us, the question was the lowest income group in Singapore, could they afford that 3-room flat? And the answer is many of them still can, but there's still a relatively underserved, not really looked after community. So again, same data, but very different conclusions based on what your goal and your intention and purpose is.
Okay.
Yeah.
This opens up a question that I've been quite interested in over the last few years, which is, can you democratize this whole I don't know, industry or democratize this whole skill set of collecting the data, harvesting the data, and then like creating insights out of it? If we could have like this fantasy scenario, right? Say I am an 18-year-old growing up in a low-income family, and I want to get more insights into why I am struggling, right? Maybe why my family struggling financially, right? What if you put yourself in that 18-year-old shoes, assuming with all your skill sets, right? What data could this 18-year-old possibly begin to track? Let's say it's just for personal insight. Like, I want to know why maybe my family is not doing too well, or I want to know why I'm not doing like mentally well. Whichever direction is easier for you to talk about.
Admittedly, this is a little tough because I feel that if I were really to empathize with I'm an 18-year-old in a low-income family, I think the top of my mind would be to collect data.
Yes.
But but if really we were talking about, hypothetical situation where they're given the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to collect data about myself, I suppose mental health would be the easiest part to connect to.
Yeah.
I would probably try to track my moods throughout the day and compare and sort of make analysis against things like school, how long and how often I'm home, my interactions with other people, and finding some way to quantify that. And I say this because I'm presuming there's probably there's a hypothesis here, and that there is a correlation between your mental health and the struggles your family has, right? So as an 18-year-old, you're probably at that intersection of you're just about to finish school, and if you're from a low-income family, there are those pressures of needing to support your family as well, or add to the family's income. There's also probably, you're at the crossroads of making greater life decisions, like whether or not you should further your education and what that would cost your family, right? So like educational opportunities are expensive. So you'll probably be making some sort of analysis around that.
So if let's say I decided to track I construct a 0 to 10 scale of how much anguish I'm in. And I'm tracking when dad comes home and yells at me, I am at a 8. And then I track it in my little journal.
Yeah.
Right? And then, I didn't do my homework, I put it on. And if I track it over time, I can see what is the factor that's causing me the greatest anguish. Or I see actually the range of things that's causing me anguish.
Yeah. I mean, there's a certain assumption, I mean, that's assumption. But it doesn't need to be that. It can be, for example, over family dinner, your parents have a conversation about, they need to buy something and that's expensive. And that gives you anxiety and stress, right? Because you have a heightened awareness of, oh no, the family needs money.
Right.
And the thing that I want, I can't get it, right? So that's an element too. The other thing I probably would collect data around if I were that 18-year-old is actually my time. So actually in conversations around low-income families in Singapore, many people have studied what they call time poverty.
Yeah.
Right? And that is something that I think people who are not low-income find hard to relate to and forget sometimes. And that is actually the poorer you are, the less time you have, because you spend a lot of time compensating for things. So for example, in Singapore, if you are low income, chances are you're not going to live close to the city centre. You will be living on the fringes of Singapore. So Jurong or Woodlands, Pasir Ris, for example.
Or JB.
Yeah, or JB, yeah, even worse, yeah. And commuting takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not that they don't want to make most of their time, but, it's an opportunity cost. They could be making money during that time. They could be studying. They could be doing other things, but they don't have that time. And they also don't have things like a car to help them travel from place to place faster, right? So I would probably track, time. So if I'm an 18-year-old, I'll probably, do some sort of analysis of my time. And I realized that, actually I'm spending a lot of my time, say, doing odd jobs, part-time work. And those could be opportunities for me to, pick up an internship, for example, or, help work on my applications, or, work on my projects to get a better grade, or even go for like remedial class or tuition class. Yeah. So, there's an opportunity cost and data, like time is probably one of the things I would, measure.
I guess what really intrigues me about this whole like democratization of data related skills or data gathering is because I read a book years ago that really struck me. It's this guy called Mauricio Miller. He's very interested in how do we create more equality, economic equality. And his book is called The Alternative. And it was all about how he decided a lot of the social sector policies in the States weren't working. And he decided to just like, let me restart from scratch. I want to help a bunch of like low-income families track their own data. And I will give them all these data points to track. And I remember like it's not just the financial data points. He got them to track more social-oriented data points, like how many people did you meet this week? And he paid these families a small stipend for high-quality data. And he made them clear that I'm paying you for high-quality data. That's the job here. And the whole point, he was trying to create a very good data set that he could bring to local banks and say, I don't know what you're tracking. This is what I'm tracking. And I'm telling you, family A, family B, they are a good family to loan to up their credit score. And I thought that was such a power move.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been very curious about like whether anyone is trying to create that alternative like data set.
Yeah, there is. And when you shared that, a project came to mind, or a particular example came to mind, and that is Shiao-yin's book, This Is What Inequality Looks Like. She had a little, I think in either like chapter 1 or 2, I can't recall exactly, but she asked one of her interviewees to draw a map of where they would commute to every day. And things like going to the bank, going to the post office, picking up groceries, these are all decisions that somebody in the lower income group have to make very carefully in the day because they have very limited time. And the ease of moving around these places was very important to them as well. So she got them to do like a little map of how far they would, need to travel, for example.
So is all that like quantitative and qualitative?
So I think in the book it's qualitative, but she then now she's done like a fuller paper. I'm struggling to remember the name all of a sudden, but she did a fuller research paper together with other researchers. Okay, I will need to go and find the...
Yeah, it's okay. You can talk in general.
Oh, it's called the What's Enough data set. Yes, now that it's coming to my mind. So she actually made this information public. So she collected very, very detailed information on expenditure of different families in Singapore to quantify what's a respectable minimum income level. So it's not about what the state presumes you need a minimum to survive, but she remeasured it based on a certain quality of life. So for example, if you are a child, you want to celebrate your birthday in a small way, right? So buying a cake, for example, or, having the ability to make one holiday a year to like Malaysia, right? So she she collected all the price points of these things and then made a recommendation on what, a single mother family would look like, or a couple and 2 kids would look like, or an elderly individual would look like, and made a recommendation on what would a respectable quality of life look like. And that was very different from any sort of minimum income conversations that Singapore had before. And that she's made that data public as well. And there's like a little calculator on the website that you could input to gain an understanding of, what the income level would be. And I remember it's not a huge conversation because I remember the median for a couple and 2 kids, like the recommended income was around household income was around, it's like 6.5K and thereabouts. which is quite a shocking revelation for most Singaporeans because we always presume, oh, maybe like 4,000, like 1,000 each per person. And even like sometimes in like, for example, our social services, like we measure like a certain minimum income per person to be around like 800, for example. But then we realize with her data set that that's not enough. I mean, it is enough to live, to survive, but whether or not you're having a good quality of life that can maybe move you up, certain social mobility, like those are two different things, right? So I thought it was very nice that she intervened in a space that was needed. Yeah.